it wasn't until the post-production phase that we really had to kind of world build the online side of things. We had all the pieces in place for the FaceTimes with the actors and the Zoom calls, but we had a lot of malleability actually with the script in the post-production phase because of how much of it took place on screens.
I've been a big fan of your work since AP Bio, admittedly. I had grown out of Disney by the time you had come on board with Sunny with a Chance, but I love what you've done with this movie. And it is such a chilling but funny ride at the same time. Now I know you and Matthew obviously go back to So Random and everything like that, but when did he first approach you with this, and what about it made you want to make your feature debut with this?
Thank you so much for the kind words, first of all. Matthew Scott was immediately one of my best friends as soon as I met him on So Random. I had never met anybody who loved to laugh and scream as much as me. We both just love spooky things and we love comedy. And I love his annual play, Spook Night, every year is one of the funniest things I've ever attended. And I kept begging him, please write something for me to direct. And he wrote a short film called Don't Turn Off the Ghost Light that we shot together during quarantine. And it was just so much fun. It went so well. I was like, you got to write a feature now. And so he was able to, unfortunately kind of dig from personal experience that I also related to as well of, just growing up in the industry, having those parasocial relationships. And this film is, all about watching somebody get stalked both in person and online. And I think that was something that we were the perfect people to tell that story.
You mentioned that he wrote it, but I'm curious how much input you actually had into the story and the script, given you had, like you just said, a shared experience with him of growing up as a child actor and having those kinds of fans.
Matthew Scott is definitely the writer on it. He wrote it. He would send it over to myself and Dylan and our producer Chaz, and we would all read it and, obviously give notes and talk about it. It was still always Matthew Scott's words. He has a very iconic way of speaking. It reminds a lot of people of like Buffy the Vampire Slayer, how there's sort of like a world lingo. So I wanted to make sure that it was still Matthew Scott's words and his story that he wanted to tell. But we all contributed to, of course, like the classic like beats and horror moments. We had really a lot of fun developing the villain character. I think that was my favorite part of really digging into Bucky, this little farm boy that he played on television is coming back to haunt him. And the actor who plays our Bucky is Grant Jordan, and he was just so much fun to work with. And I think my biggest contributions were just sort of taking Matthew Scott's material and just deepening it of saying, okay, like let's use this as sort of the fun surface layer and then talk about, what the audience isn't seeing and what this guy's backstory is.
Well, I love that you got to have that collaborative process with him. And Matthew Scott, I mean, as great as he does with the writing on this, he also brings such a likable presence to the lead role. Was it always in your mind to have him star in this as much as write it, or was that kind of just a discussion you two had as the development of this went on?
Yeah, 100%. This was something that Matthew Scott wrote with himself in mind. And it was the kind of thing where we wanted to collaborate together in that way as, him as an actor and me as a director. And so that was a big thing for us throughout the whole filmmaking process of let's figure out how to make this movie the way that we want to make it.
Now, one of the things that I find interesting about the way you made this movie is that it's entirely a Screenlife production. It's a genre that I've loved even before Unfriended went and made it popular with movies like The Den and whatnot. And I'm curious if that was immediately in your mind to make this a Screenlife production, or if that was in Matthew Scott's mind when he was writing it. How did that genre come about?
I mean, Matthew Scott writes very fast, so it's hard to remember exactly the order of how things came together. It sort of feels like he just latches onto an idea and the whole thing manifests around that. But the Screenlife element was something that in the script, it would just say texts go by saying things like this and that. And it wasn't always super detailed. And particularly with things like live feeds where there's a lot of comments rolling by. That was something where it wasn't until the post-production phase that we really had to kind of world build the online side of things. We had all the pieces in place for the FaceTimes with the actors and the Zoom calls, but we had a lot of malleability actually with the script in the post-production phase because of how much of it took place on screens.
That's awesome. Now, did you find that to be a more challenging method of production, given that you, in your past, have done a lot of shorts that are maybe more traditional shooting?
I mean, it was definitely a challenge. I know the burden fell primarily on our tiny VFX team to really just mastermind this whole thing. But I'm really proud of what we accomplished. Just yeah, reimagining sort of what that world would look like. A big thing for us was we wanted the phones to be horizontal rather than vertical. That was something if I didn't want the black bars on the side, and just sort of reinterpreting what things would look like if you twisted them to the side. And I think it works pretty well, and it feels pretty natural. I would say, every film is going to have its challenges, and this one was easy in terms of, it's one actor in one room, and so the shooting process, we knocked it out in 10 days. So that part of it was easy, and then of course the year of post-production following it, I was like, okay, there's a give and take.
Well, the work shows. It's a very impressive looking film, given the amount of time that you spent on it. Now, I love the cast that you've built around Matthew Scott. I especially loved seeing Allisyn Snyder. I was a fan of theirs in Sweet Life of Zack and Cody. I almost didn't recognize them at first in this movie, but then I thought it was really cool when I went through the cast list and saw their name pop up. What was it like building the rest of this cast around Matthew Scott for this movie?
My gosh, it was really a dream come true, because these were our best friends and our coworkers, people that we've grown up with in the industry, and to be able to reach out to them with a script that was so personal to us and that they also resonated with as well, and just find a new way to come back and work together as a group was just so fun. Debbie was really the one that once we got her signed on, everything started to kick into high gear of, quick, we gotta make sure we have a location and then sort everything else out around her schedule. So that was a really exciting casting moment to get Debbie on board. Everybody else, they're all really close friends of Matthew Scott. I know my castmates, Damien and Shane from So Random as well. They play some cops in the film, and that was so much fun to have them in there for one morning for that scene. I think the working with Allisyn Snyder was really fun. We actually drove. They're not in Los Angeles anymore, and so we drove further out to go meet them up at like some little mall that was like halfway in between, and it was a really quick shoot. I think we were there for like an hour. Only 10 minutes of that was shooting. The rest was just hanging out and talking and catching up. And it was just something where it didn't feel like there's not the 45-person crew and the hubbub and the quick, you gotta, move on. And it was something where we really got to just like sit down and enjoy creating with each other.
It sounds like a very rich experience to have especially with a bunch of creative friends that you have in this cast. Now, speaking of Debbie in particular, though, I love her charisma that she shows throughout this whole movie. And you mentioned that, once you cast her, that you kind of had to move things along quicker. And so I'm curious if that led to any script reworkings in order to either have her more in it or have her less in it based on her schedule.
Yeah, there was no adjustments to the amount that she was in the script. Debbie actually wanted to be very involved in creating the Harley character. And so I remember she had read an early version of the script. She was actually in a table read that we hosted because Matthew Scott, after he wrote the script, just wanted to hear it kind of out loud. And so he just recruited his friends, Debbie being one of them, and just fell in love with hearing her read the lines and was like, please, will you please play this role? And she really wanted to make sure that it was like a fully fleshed out character with a personality. She helped pick out all the wardrobe and design like the hair and the look and everything for it. It was cool to see her get so excited about the character and infuse so much of herself into it.
That's fantastic. She really does just make that character pop on screen. It's fantastic. Now, you mentioned the villain character earlier. Bucky is, even though he's supposed to be from a sitcom, he's terrifying to look at. I'm curious what it was like developing the look for this, essentially a character that didn't exist.
Yeah, Matthew Scott and I had talked about what we wanted Bucky to look like, and Matthew Scott's brother Daniel Montgomery is a really talented artist, and he drew up some kind of sketches of what that might look like. And then when it was getting to crunch time, we were looking at different places that print masks and what we just could even source in time. And my husband Dylan and I went to this local mask maker who prints vinyl masks, and we were asking about like how much it would cost to like actually build out the shape of a mask, and it was like not even close to within our budget. And so we were like, what else do you have? Like, what could we buy? And he had this clown mask, which is why Bucky has such like a bulbous nose. So he had this clown mask, and I painted it to match Daniel's kind of imagery and to look a little bit like Matthew Scott, but of course a creepy version.
I love that DIY approach. I mean, it's what made Michael Myers so iconic with a William Shatner mask done over. So that's awesome. What would you say was one of the most creatively rewarding takeaways that you had from this movie?
Creatively rewarding. I was just so happy that we pulled off the way that we wanted to tackle Screenlife. Was I didn't want to do like glitch effects to mask cuts or anything. I really wanted it to feel like you're actually on a FaceTime. So we wanted those long one shots. So when you watch the film, it's not like other one shots where, you know, the camera's moving all throughout the house and it's like, wow, what a crazy one shot they pulled off. But it's like 7-minute scenes of actors just talking to each other. And we didn't film those at the same time on the same days, just due to actor availability and location availability. What we did is we made it kind of like a musical where everybody was performing to tracks. And so we rehearsed everything extensively ahead of time. And then Dylan went in and dipped the audio of each person so that they would have their scene partners' dialogue to rehearse with, and then just little gaps in between. Anybody who's done a self-tape with themselves will know what that's like.
I can only imagine both how awkward it must feel, but also how exciting it must feel to get to do it.
It was challenging. It was something that I don't know if I prepared the cast for it well enough by like really explaining to them what was happening ahead of time. I know some of them picked up on it a little quicker, but I remember specifically Kevin Chamberlain when we were working together. He would get towards the end of the scene, and then there would be like one mess up, and then he would keep going. And I'm like, oh, Kevin, I need you to go back to the top of the scene. He's like, you can just cut it. I'm like, no, Kevin, you don't understand. we can't cut this. And then he just came out to, we had a screening out in Palm Springs at Cinema Diverse, and Kevin was able to come with his husband, and he watched it. He was like, I see now, Allisyn, that makes sense.
I love the strides you took for this movie. They really all pay off very well. And now the movie's about to premiere at Screamfest. How are you feeling leading up to its premiere after this whole process?
Oh my goodness. It's still feels a little bit surreal, especially at the Chinese theater. I'm just like nonstop geeking out. This has been just an absolute dream come true. And just to be able to send out a text to friends and family saying like, my directorial debut is screening at the Chinese theater. Come out and see it. It's just, I'm going to be crying like a baby the whole night.
It's a well-earned debut, I must say. I know I keep saying all these glowy things, but I do mean them. So, and as a horror genre fan, I think it's a great debut for you. And I'm curious if you now have plans to continue down that road in the director's chair, or if you want to explore other genres in the director's chair.
I'm constantly creating, and I will definitely be directing. My husband directs as well. We're working on his directorial debut as well. I'm also directing a play coming up called Nothing Special, and that'll be happening in November. It's all about Edie Sedgwick and Andy Warhol and his factory from the 60s, and just kind of art and life then versus now. And that's a fun little thing that we've been doing amid the strike to keep everybody sane and creative. I'm
glad that you were able to find a creative outlet during that very troubling time. And hopefully for the actors side of things, that comes to an end soon as well. Before I let you go for my final question, like I mentioned at the top, I was an AP Bio fan. I was disappointed when it met the axe. And I'm curious, though, what it was like for you, looking back on that experience where you jumped from NBC to Peacock and still were getting, so much praise from critics and audiences alike.
Thank you. Yeah, that was quite a wild ride working on AP Bio. The jump over to Peacock was something that made sense. And we had been saying for ages of just, especially with Glenn and Patton and our demographic, we were like, this show should be on streaming. I don't, it's why it's on the main channel. But yeah, Peacock was a perfect home for it, and our fourth season was quite a blast. It got pretty crazy. I had a character named Janet Fist on season 4 that I'm not sure if Mike O'Brien based it off of me and my web series or not that I'd been running at the time, but it was a dream come true to be able to play Heather playing a character.
It was perfect for your creative sensibilities, for that character, and for the show as a whole. I'm sad that it ended, but I'm glad that it at least opened the door for you to do this. So thank you, Allisyn, so much for taking the time. I can't wait to spread the word about this movie and for people to finally see it.
Dude, thank you so much. I really appreciate that.